Greetings, traveller of time. Somewhere in 11th century Europe, night air settles quietly over the Abbey of Saint-Félicien, a grey stone refuge tucked between gentle hills and murmuring streams, where the glow of a single bonfire barely pushes back the damp darkness of the inner courtyard. I'm only an old historian, ready to whisper forgotten stories. If sleep comes for you, I'll be glad. But tell me, from what corner of the world have you arrived? And while you're here, feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The scent of dried herbs and burning beeswax drifts through the monk's cells, blending with the sharp metallic smell that hangs over the infirmary. Feel the weight of a silence, broken only by the slow, steady toll of the bell marking the hour of prime, and the cold, rough texture of stone beneath bare feet, while a muffled groan echoes from the adjoining room, carrying a gentle note of quiet sorrow. Our eyes move toward the infirmary, a high-ceilinged chamber, stark and solemn, where Brother Eramus, a thin-bearded monk with weary eyes, walks with a ceremonial gravity. He isn't a physician trained in the new universities, but the Abbey's healer, a man whose wisdom comes from old volumes and an unshaken belief in the body's humours, a doctrine shaping all medical thought of the time. Medieval medicine, though guided by good intentions, leaned heavily on the idea that health required balance between four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. For them, it was more philosophy than science. Brother Eramus holds a small, polished iron scalpel, and the glimmer of the blade, in the trembling flame of an oil lamp, carries a quiet, almost sacred authority. On a straw bed beside him lies a peasant named Thibaut, brought from a nearby village with a stubborn fever and aching joints, illnesses the cold season delighted in worsening. Thibaut breathes with difficulty, his forehead drenched with cold sweat, his body curled beneath a coarse wool blanket. The monk touches the man's brow and feels the heat burning beneath the skin, a clear sign in his mind that an excess of blood is overheating the body and must be released to restore inner peace. Bloodletting, or phlebotomy, was considered the most logical cure for nearly every illness, from headaches to the deadliest plague. Brother Eramus prepares for the procedure, as routine as the morning prayer, though it carries a silent danger for a man already weakened. He ties a rough tourniquet around Thibault's arm, and the pale skin turns flushed and pink, the veins rising beneath the pressure. The sharp scent of herbal alcohol, distilled water far from sterile, floats in the air, a bittersweet contrast to the odor of sickness. The peasant, frightened but obedient, shuts his eyes, bracing for the sudden sting of the blade. The scalpel breaks the skin with practiced precision, and the first stream of blood, dark and thick, flows into the copper basin he holds steady. The soft, wet rhythm of droplets breaks the silence, a sound Brother Eramus hears as healing in motion. But what he believes to be the release of excess, modern science would see as draining a body already starving for red cells needed to fight infection. Weak from fever and hunger, Thibault feels his head spin, but says nothing. He was raised to believe that pain was the price of recovery. Across the infirmary, a young noblewoman named Isolde suffers from unbearable stomach pains, which Brother Eramus attributes to an excess of black bile. To cure it, he turns to one of the most dangerous substances in his collection, a treatment made with mercury, a metal revered by some alchemists for its transformative and therefore healing properties. He grinds the shimmering powder in a stone mortar, the metallic dust sparkling beneath the lamplight, its strange, acrid smell clinging to the throat. But instead of healing Isolde, the mercury becomes a silent poison. With the best of intentions, he stirs the powder into a bitter herbal tea and asks her to drink quickly, assuring her the illness will soon be expelled. Imagine the thick, oily texture on the tongue, and the chemical bitterness that lingers long after the sip, while Brother Aramis watches with sincere hope for the improvement ancient wisdom had promised. Infection, an unseen enemy in the 11th century, lurks everywhere. The scalpel used on Thibault is merely wiped with a damp cloth before being stored again, carrying the microbes of every patient it has touched. The air is stagnant and moist, heavy with dust, while murky water used to wash bandages and tools hides threats the monks could not imagine. To them, disease was often divine punishment or a spiritual or planetary imbalance. Their focus turned to rituals, prayers, and crude manipulation of the body, never sterilization. Feel the chill of the stone floor, where scraps of medical work mix with dust, and hear the persistent buzz of flies resting in the corners, a living reminder of how easily treatment became injury. Medieval medicine was a woven cloth of superstition, herbal tradition, and heavily distorted texts of Galen and Hippocrates. Urine, for example, was considered a powerful window into the body. Healers practiced uroscopy, observing color, smell, even taste, to diagnose illness. Picture the weak lamplight shining through a glass vial as Brother Aramis studies Thibault's sample, searching for signs of the body cooking the disease away. Clear urine meant the illness still lingered. Cloudy urine, they believed, meant the body was pushing the sickness out. In truth, cloudiness could simply mean dehydration, but tradition mattered more than observation. Cupping was another common practice, meant to draw corrupted humors toward the skin where they could be released. Feel the sudden heat of a warmed cup on flesh and the tight pull as a vacuum forms, momentary relief mistaken for cure. While Thibault recovers from bloodletting, Brother Aramis places cups along Isolde's back, hoping to counter the damage caused by the mercury. Smell the faint scent of burning cotton and heated glass against skin, and hear the soft crackle as the suction tightens. Combined with bleeding and toxic purges, these treatments often left patients weaker, their immune systems collapsing under the assault. Outside the monastery, village healers prepared poultices of animal dung, mud, and herbs, mixed in filthy conditions. They believed impurity drew illness outward. The heavy smell of damp soil and rotting matter filled peasant homes, a desperate attempt at healing when no monk could help. Brother Aramis, bound to the church's teachings, used gentler balms, olive oil mixed with garden herbs like chamomile and mugwort, known for calming pain. Feel the warm, thick ointment between fingers, sweet and earthy against the cold air, as he spreads it across the bruises left by the cups, a rare moment of comfort amid harsh treatments. Boticarios, traveling apothecaries, visited villages selling remedies and charms, a mix of true herbal knowledge and pure deceit. Their wagons rattled through the square, stirring hope and fear as they arrived with confident smiles and honeyed words. One of their most prized and dangerous remedies was Mithridatium, a legendary panacea made of dozens of ingredients, including opium, honey, and sometimes poison, in tiny doses. The sweet scent of honey blended with the narcotic smell of opium in a ceramic jar that promised relief, but offered addiction or slow poisoning instead. Back in the abbey, Brother Aramis prepares a second round of bloodletting for Thibault. The fever hasn't broken, so he believes the excess blood must still be removed. Pale and faint, the peasant barely reacts. Submission was expected, for weakness was seen as proof the treatment was working. This time, the monk cuts near the ankle, convinced the location of the blood determined its effect, a system guided by astrology and geography. Blood once again splashes into the basin, the sound dull and wet, and Brother Aramis feels satisfied. Thibault's spinning head signals the edge of anemia, but to the monk it means the battle is finally turning. Meanwhile, Isolde worsens. The mercury poisons her body, bringing waves of nausea and violent vomiting. Confused, Brother Aramis turns back to ancient manuscripts, rereading Greek teachings about metals and purging. Believing the illness must be expelled entirely, he prepares an even stronger laxative made of harsh roots and leaves. The sharp smell of vomit and bitter remedies hangs in the air, a quiet scent of despair. Exhausted but unwavering, Brother Aramis blames not his methods, but the stubbornness of the sickness. He cannot know his treatment is killing her. He lights another lamp, its trembling glow revealing faces twisted in pain and resignation, a scene shaped by faith and ignorance, a silent reminder of how devotion could be both comforting and dangerous in the 11th century. Night deepens over the abbey, carrying a cold that seems to seep into the stone walls and the bones of the sick. Brother Aramis, exhausted yet resolute, makes his final rounds, a heavy lantern in hand casting long, wavering shadows into the corners of the infirmary, where life and suffering meet in a charged hush. He murmurs prayers, lifting his thoughts to the Virgin Mary and the healing saints, seeking a divine hand where he feels his frail human wisdom fall short. His faith drives him forward, but it also keeps him from questioning the inner logic of repeated bleedings and harsh purges. Lacking scientific knowledge of anatomy and complex physiology, the monks saw the body as a mirror of the universe, ruled by fixed laws of balance and imbalance. Illness to them was chaos invading inner order. Cure meant forcing nature back into harmony through rituals and substances meant to restore that balance. Imagine the faint scent of incense as Brother Aramis lights a stick beside Thibault's bed, a thin, perfumed ribbon of smoke he believes can send the spirits of sickness away. For the peasant, it brings a fleeting sense of peace and protection. Thibault sleeps fitfully. The darkness around the abbey sharpens the pallor of his skin, and the coarse wool blanket can't still the shivers that ripple through him. He dreams of fields and work, of strength washing out of him with every drop of blood spilled, a loss his body feels keenly, though his mind accepts it as a necessary step toward health. Listen to the thin, uneven whisper of his breathing, so faint against the heavy quiet of the night, and feel how fragile life is, balanced between the hope of healing and the danger of the cure. In the same room, Isolde lets out a soft moan. Brother Aramis steps to her bedside, sensing fever's return despite his efforts to purge the excess black bile. The mercury, meant to cleanse her, now brings sharper pain and exhaustion. Unaware of the poisoning, the monk decides the next intervention will be a change of diet, what he calls a regimen. Medieval diets for the sick were as strict as the medicines themselves, often little more than thin broths and dry bread, which ironically starved the body of the very nutrients it needed to recover. He recalls an old teaching that cooking the illness required heat and fluid retention. He tells the servant, tending Isolde, to restrict her water and offer only a warm, watery broth at dawn. Her thirst burns, a quiet agony that makes her lick her cracked lips, but she obeys, believing suffering is a fair price for health. Feel the rasp of a dry throat and the hollow ache of an empty stomach as the imposed fast, instead of healing her, hastens her decline. It's striking how medicine, in its ignorance, could turn against itself. One curious practice of the time was using rock crystal to cauterize and stop bleeding. Because it was clear and pure, they believed it could absorb feverish heat and seal wounds, when in truth, its only real effect was simple pressure. Brother Aramis keeps a small polished crystal at his belt in case Thibault's wound starts to bleed again. Cold and smooth in the monk's hand, a stark contrast to the patient's warm, damp skin. Monasteries and abbeys were often the only accessible centers of medical knowledge. Though monks weren't surgeons, barbers usually handled cutting and bleeding with their razors. They were guardians of ancient texts. Brother Eramus spends long hours in his cell by candlelight, bent over thick parchments filled with simplified diagrams of the human body. Layouts more allegorical than accurate, repeating centuries-old mistakes. He turns a sheet and finds a diagram linking the liver to the humor of blood, confirming his belief that bleeding is the proper course. Smell the must and old ink rising from the pages. Feel the grainy texture of the parchment beneath his fingertips. Rigid knowledge, untempered by observation or experiment, turns every treatment into an act of blind faith in the words of the past, often at the expense of the patient's well-being. Remember that, to the medieval mind, healing often meant working with noble substances, gold, silver, and paradoxically toxic metals like mercury, seen as carrying airy, curative qualities. Alchemy, the forerunner of chemistry, shaped medicine deeply, feeding the belief that illness could be transformed and driven out through purification with these elements. Gathering the leftover mercury he gave Isolde, Brother Eramus feels the subtle weight of the metal in a ceramic cup, a weight that to him symbolizes healing strength. He doesn't realize that handling the heavy metal, breathing its vapors, and ignoring cleanliness are slowly harming him too, bringing on a faint tremor he blames on sleepless nights. There's no concept of toxicology here. The healer is often his own unwitting victim. One of the most widespread superstitions concerned the moon's influence over treatments. People believed that the success of bleeding and herb gathering changed with lunar phases and the planet's positions. Before deciding on Thibault's next bleeding, Brother Eramus consults a small wooden astrological calendar, choosing a moment when the moon is favorable for purging the body. Feel the night's cold sliding through the narrow window of his cell and the smell of mildewed parchment as he checks the star charts to justify his method. This mingling of early proto-science and astrology defines the period. Watching the heavens is as vital to cure as watching the body, layering mysticism atop an already risky craft. At first light, pale sun filters through the infirmary windows, laying the starkness bare. Thibault is weaker, almost listless. Isolde still suffers, her lips split from thirst and her body wrung out by purges. Brother Eramus approaches them both with a hopeful smile, believing the worst has passed and the body will now begin to heal. He doesn't read their frailty as decline, but as proof that the illness is finally retreating. He mixes a plaster for Thibault from wheat flour and pork fat, pressing it over the bleeding site to seal the wound and keep disease from re-entering. A faith in a physical barrier against invisible harms. Feel the thick, greasy paste on the skin and the rancid tang of fat woven into the room's herbal scent. Without antiseptics, spreading unsterile substances straight onto a wound raises the risk of secondary infections, which so often become the true cause of death. For Isolde, the monk tries a gentler way to balance her humors, leeches, which he sees as more natural than the scalpel. A living creature that feeds on blood, the leech is imagined as a tiny healer that removes bad blood slowly and safely. Think of the leech's cool, slick body sliding over skin as it hunts for a place to latch, a touch both repulsive and oddly promising. The leech, fastening to Isolde's arm, sipping what little blood she has left, becomes an emblem of the age's medicine, the faith in forced purification, even at the cost of the patient's strength. Feel the soft pinch of the bite and the numbness that follows as the creature releases a mild anesthetic. Though less brutal than mercury, the practice deepens her anemia and blocks a full recovery. Medieval healers didn't see fever as the body's fight against disease. To them, fever was the disease, a surplus of heat that had to be cooled and drained. So treatments aimed at cooling and bleeding, never realizing fever could be a vital defense. Brother Aramis fans Thibault with a straw fan, hoping to bring his temperature down, a tender gesture built on a mistaken view of how the body works. Sense the faint breeze over Thibault's face and the constant papery whisper of the fan, repetitive, almost like a mantra. This insistence on cooling when his body is trying to battle an infection is one more way the era's medicine undercuts its own patients, turning them into casualties of care. Brother Aramis steps away to the abbey kitchen to prepare more potions, leaving the infirmary in a quiet, melancholy morning stillness. He boils herbs in great iron cauldrons. Steam fills the air, and the sharp scents of rosemary and rue rise with it, an assertive fragrance trying to cover the smell of illness. Only the fire's crackle and the simmering water break the calm. Saint-Félicien, its ancient walls and well-meaning rites, stands as a small world of medieval medicine, a place where devotion and ignorance walk side by side, and where the line between cure and suffering is thin and almost invisible. Brother Aramis embodies a time when trust in the ancients outweighed attention to the present, and his patients, Thibault and Isolde, bear silent witness to how a lack of knowledge could wound more than the illness itself. Morning light spills across their beds, softening the fragile planes of their faces, catching the quiet resignation in their eyes. They give themselves over to the monk's wisdom, trusting that the next potion, the next bleeding, will bring recovery, even as each treatment draws them closer to collapse. Brother Aramis returns with a cup of dark, thick liquid, a new purge for Isolde, assuring her that this time the evil will be expelled. His voice is gentle, full of conviction and the promise of relief, the only certainty she has in the midst of pain. He doesn't know it, but he's about to carry out his third assault on her body in just a few hours, a vicious cycle of weakness that medieval medicine mistakes for the height of healing, blind faith in a broken system. The monk's face, stern and benevolent, as he offers the purgative to Isolde, is its own paradox. The hand that gives the cure is the same hand that brings suffering. The purgative's scent, earthy and strong, spreads through the air, a bitter promise of health. This is the world we're invited to witness, a place where intent and outcome often part ways, and where the mystery of life keeps company with the mystery of death. The soft murmur of morning prayers rises from the depths of Saint-Félicien Abbey, drifting into the scent of fresh bread and the acrid smell of sweat and human waste seeping from the infirmary. Brother Aramis, just returned from the chapel, stands once more beside Thibault's bed with the first central element of this part of the story, a small lead container holding a greyish paste, which he believes represents the highest form of mineral purification. With a calm, steady voice, he tells the peasant that this is the new stage of treatment, meant to neutralize the harmful humors that bleeding, in his view, couldn't fully expel. The stillness of the room breaks only with the gentle sound of the paste being mixed into a little red wine, an odd blend of color and smell that stirs both hope and quiet danger. He explains that the mixture, ground mineral and fortified wine, acts as a weighting agent, strong enough to pull the densest impurities out of the digestive tract. Breathe in the sharp smell of sulfur and heavy metal rising from the paste, an odor Brother Aramis reads as a sign of potency, though to us it is the unmistakable warning of poison. Minerals like lead and arsenic, in small doses, appear in some Arabic and European medical texts of the time, where their hardness was believed to overpower stubborn disease. Thibault, still weak and parched, accepts the spoon the monk lifts to his lips. The metallic, earthy taste spreads across his tongue, strange and unpleasant, and he swallows quickly, chased by the sugary warmth of wine. His frailty, born from blood loss and lack of food, leaves his body defenseless against the heavy mineral now moving through his system. Brother Aramis encourages him gently, promising that this final purge will bring peace and restore the balance of humors at last, a fragile promise of rest. Meanwhile, Isolde's body is wrapped in cool, damp cloths, a method the monk uses to fight the fever that's raged ever since the mercury and harsh purgatives began poisoning her. The scent of wine vinegar soaked into the bandages is sharp and biting, and the chill against her burning skin brings a brief moment of relief before a deeper shiver follows. The fever, her immune system struggling to survive, is something the monk mistakes for an enemy to be chilled and drained. Brother Aramis steps away to wash his instruments in the stone basin at the corner of the room, an act he considers sufficient for cleanliness. But the cold stream flowing in from the abbey's creek can't remove dried blood or grime, and unseen germs cling to the steel blade. He can't imagine that invisible life could cause illness. Germ theory will not exist for centuries. In this world, every new patient risks infection from the last. He turns to Thibault's wounds again, noticing how slowly they close. He chooses a special salve, ashes and olive oil, to dry the wound and speed its healing. Picture the thick, dark mixture, smelling of smoke and warm oil, spreading across broken skin. But the ashes carry grit and hidden bacteria, irritating the tender flesh and keeping infection alive. Recalling a passage from Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, which he once read in a Latin translation, Brother Aramis reflects on the importance of rest. Medieval healing demanded absolute stillness, often for weeks, leaving muscles to waste and circulation to falter. Feel the heaviness of Thibault's limbs, stiff from immobility, his body locked into obedience, even when movement might save him. The monk's practice is shaped by the belief in pus bonum et laudabile, good and praiseworthy pus. Thick yellow discharge meant the body was pushing illness outward, so when Isolde's wounds show a faint yellow tinge caused by the leeches, Brother Aramis smiles, convinced that the treatment is working. A clean wound in his mind is one in which the disease is trapped inside. To strengthen the healing, he turns to faith. From a silver reliquary, he removes a fragment of bone from the abbey's patron saint, a cold, polished sliver of sacred history. He places it gently on Isolde's chest and whispers a rhythmic prayer, the soft chant filling the room with quiet reassurance. To Brother Aramis, faith is the final remedy, stronger than any herb or metal, a comfort that soothes even when the body fails. In a moment of stillness, he lets his thoughts wander. He recalls a story from a traveler about a physician in Salerno who claimed that urine should be the same color as a patient's pale skin. A strange idea, but interesting. Such odd regional theories were common. Each corner of Europe had its own rules, its own traditions, its own scientific boundaries. He lifts a clay cup to his lips, drinking well water cold and faintly flavored with moss, feeling the rough texture of the vessel. He has no way of knowing that the clean-looking water may carry sickness, the source of recurring fevers among monks and patients alike. Purity of stone and purity of faith can't kill what the eye can't see. Believing sleep is essential, he brews a tea of wild poppy for Thibault, known for its soothing narcotic qualities. The scent of cooked poppy, sweet, heavy, almost floral, drifts through the air, promising rest and escape from pain. Yet the tea dulls symptoms, clouds awareness, and leaves the monk blind to worsening illness. Isolde's breathing grows shallow and quick. For Brother Aramis, the final measure to force the humours to leave is a vesicatory poultice made from ground cantharides beetles. When spread on the skin, it burns and blisters, drawing fluid to the surface. The greenish paste is unsettling to see, a remedy that wounds in the name of healing. Feel its gritty texture, the sharp sting that flares across Isolde's skin, the cry of pain that slips from her lips. The blistering liquid to him is the poison leaving her body. He watches with calm conviction. Suffering is a necessary stage. Pain is proof that the cure is working. He notes in his healing diary that the vesicatory is performing excellently and that Tybalt rests peacefully under the poppy tea, though both are sliding quietly toward collapse. As he crosses the room, the soft scrape of his heavy wool habit against stone is the only sound, a quiet reminder of his presence, a presence the sick read as hope. A novice, Brother Anselm, watches him with awe and nervous respect. Aramis instructs him, never question the methods of the ancients. Tradition is the foundation of healing. He shares a story about barber surgeons, men who performed amputations and complex operations in full daylight, right inside their barber shops, without anesthesia or cleanliness. Imagine the razor being sharpened, the metallic scent of fresh blood mixing with dirty water in the streets. The divide between the learned physician and the practical surgeon keeps surgical knowledge from evolving. Returning to Thibault's bedside, Aramis feels a flicker of worry when he senses the man's faint pulse. He quickly blames natural weakness and decides the patient needs one last element to restore vital warmth. Fortified wine mixed with spices and powdered gold, a rare and luxurious remedy he saves for desperate cases. Gold, eternal and incorruptible, symbolizes perfect health. Drinking it is believed to summon strength back into the body. The warm scent of spice and wine blends with the faint metallic fragrance of gold dust, a perfume of wealth and healing. Though useless, the ritual carries a deep emotional promise. As he offers the golden wine to Thibault, hope swells in the monk's chest, a gentle assurance he hopes the patient will feel too. Belief, more than effectiveness, drives medicine here. An endless cycle of rituals meant to restore balance, even as they quietly erode what little strength the patients have left. Brother Aramis steps away for a short rest, leaving his patients in the hands of faith and harsh remedies beneath the silent stone of the abbey. The morning quiet inside the infirmary is only an illusion. Tybalt's body is fighting in silence, struggling beneath the weight of anemia from repeated bleedings and the slow toxicity of the heavy mineral he just swallowed. Brother Aramis, unaware of the battle within, notices a slight flush in the peasant's cheeks. He takes it as a sign that the wine and gold are strengthening the man's vital spirit, never realizing it's nothing more than a fleeting reaction to alcohol and spices. He turns his attention to Isolde. Her skin, swollen and raw from the cantharides, is marked with large blisters filled with clear fluid. With quiet satisfaction, the monk pierces each blister with a fine needle, letting the liquid drain into a clean cloth. To him, this is the spoiled matter leaving the body. Feel the sharp sting as the needle presses against taut flesh, followed by a moment of pressure releasing, small pain, small relief, enough for Brother Aramis to see proof of healing where there is only injury. But every opened blister, every drop of fluid, becomes an open doorway for infection, especially in a place where no one knows what true cleanliness is. He covers the irritated skin with a salve made of sheep fat and ashes, hoping the thick, dark paste will speed recovery. Instead, it seals dirt and bacteria beneath an oily blanket. Smell the heavy scent of mutton fat lingering around Isolde's bed, a reminder of how healing here often traps harm instead of clearing it. Medieval medicine often blurred the line between illness and divine punishment, especially when physical remedies failed. For stubborn cases, monks turned to gentle exorcisms or the laying on of hands, whispering Latin prayers to drive out whatever spirit was prolonging the suffering. Brother Eramus presses a wooden crucifix softly against Isolde's forehead, murmuring a quiet prayer, part comfort, part mystery. Even in monasteries, amulets and talismans were common, symbols of the meeting point between popular belief and sacred knowledge. Around his neck, Eramus wears a small linen pouch filled with herbs and blessed salt, which he believes shields him from contagion. When he moves, there's just a hint of lavender and salt in the air, a reminder that medicine here is also an invisible web of protections and hopes. The sun climbs higher, and the sounds of daily abbey life drift into the infirmary, doors creaking, buckets clattering, birds calling in the courtyard. Brother Eramus decides it is time to tend to other patients. An elderly monk suffers from stomach pains, so Eramus prepares a warm, mustard and oil poultice for his abdomen. The sharp, pungent smell of mustard fills the room, a new layer of sensation settling over the heavy air. The mustard doesn't cure the pain, but it brings intense heat and tingling to the skin, enough to distract from the ache inside. The monk believes this forced heat rearranges the humors and cooks the illness out of the stomach. Feel the sting on the skin and the brief, soothing distance from deeper pain, a sensory diversion that lay at the heart of many medieval cures. Brother Anselm, the young novice, enters with a wooden bowl of bread and broth. The warm, comforting smell of food stands in stark contrast to the odors of medicine and sickness. Eramus gives him instructions. Thibaut must remain on thin broth, and Isolde on near total fasting. Food, he insists, would only feed the illness. In truth, hunger starves the body, slows recovery, and deepens weakness. Later, the monk examines Thibault's urine, dark and concentrated, a clear sign of dehydration from fever and lack of water. But Eramus sees something else. To him, the darkness means the cooking of the illness is almost complete. The body is preparing to expel the evil. The mistake strengthens his resolve. He must continue the restriction of water and purgations. He sits heavily on a wooden bench, shoulders weighted by the long mourning, and drinks an infusion of wormwood and fennel, bitter on the tongue, burning softly in the throat. For him, that burning is proof that the remedy is cleansing his own system of impurities, protecting him from invisible contagion. Only by purifying himself, he believes, can he be a true instrument of healing. He asks Thibault about his dreams, because dreams, in medieval medicine, were signs of which humor ruled the body. If the dreams were peaceful, the balance was returning. Still drugged by poppy tea, Thibault mumbles about fields and harvests. Eramus smiles, hearing in those images the promise of health. A little later, he walks into the abbey's herb garden, a quiet patch of green where fresh smells linger in the air. He plucks leaves of digitalis, used to treat heart troubles. In tiny doses, digitalis could help. In larger ones, it could kill. Feel the soft velvet of the leaf, the earthy scent rising from it, a quiet beauty masking hidden danger. Medieval medicine was filled with these narrow paths, where cure and poison looked the same. Returning to the infirmary, he sees Isolde's breathing becoming shallow, a clear sign of collapse, yet he reads it as deep, healing rest. To bring calm to the room, he lights an oil lamp with lavender. The soft scent drifts through the air, rising over harsher odors, offering a fragile invitation to peace. Feel the warm glow of the small flame, and the gentle floral perfume settling like a blanket over fear and discomfort. Brother Eramus writes one last note in his healing journal, claiming progress in both patients, fewer groans, quieter movements, proof to him that the treatments are succeeding. Then he leaves for the midday meal, placing the patients under the watch of Sister Agnes, who must keep vigil in silence. The quiet that follows feels peaceful, yet beneath it lies a question. Is this the stillness of recovery, or the stillness before collapse? Before leaving, he glances once more at Isolde, her body resting beneath the damp bandages, and at Thibault, sedated by poppy tea. He trusts entirely in his methods and in the wisdom of the ancients, good intentions guided by a dangerous lack of understanding. In the abbey, silence is the sound of faith, a faith that leads the healer's hands toward comfort and toward tragedy. The scene closes with a beam of noon sunlight slipping through a crack in the infirmary wall, catching the silver reliquary resting on Isolde's chest and the empty cup beside Thibault. It is a picture of deceptive serenity. Brother Aramis walks away, certain the next intervention will bring full recovery, unaware that both bodies stand at the edge of collapse. Here, in a world where medicine often harmed more than it healed, the air feels heavy and calm. Dusk begins to paint the sky above Saint Félicien Abbey, and with it comes the hour of Brother Aramis's most meticulous observations. He turns his attention to Isolde, whose body has been battered by purgatives and blistering remedies. In the dim glow of a small oil lamp, he leans close to her pale face, breathing in the faint scent of her exhalation, a common diagnostic practice of his time. The metallic, slightly sweet odor, left by traces of mercury, convinces him that the black bile still refuses to leave. To his mind, the purging hasn't been violent enough. He decides to introduce a new element, an extremely bitter herbal compound made of saffron, aloe, and other harsh irritants. He explains to Sister Agnes that bitterness is necessary to awaken the stomach and force it to reject the impure matter. The herbal smell is sharp and burning, enough to make the eyes water, a scent that promises both pain and forced purification. Focused only on the persistent illness, Brother Aramis doesn't see the exhaustion written across Isolde's face. To make the treatment work, he follows an ancient belief that purgation should be repeated in short intervals so the body never adapts. Continuous shock, they thought, would break the illness quickly, so he administers the new purge only hours after the last one. The thick, acrid liquid slides onto Isolde's tongue, swallowed through trembling and nausea. Another reminder that, here, healing is a burden of suffering. Meanwhile, Thibault wakes from his opium sleep feeling weaker and dizzy, but without the fever he had before. To Brother Aramis, this is a triumph. In truth, the absence of fever is simply the body's surrender, too drained to maintain a fight, not healed but depleted. Still, the monk writes confidently on his parchment that the regime Henri, the regime of gold, has reduced the excess heat of blood. He keeps Thibault on strict diet and constant watch to prevent reinfection of the humours. He touches Thibault's forehead and feels coolness, and a quiet satisfaction fills him. Then he treats the man's muscle aches with a technique somewhere between massage and pressure. Warm stones wrapped in damp cloth pressed onto tense muscles. Feel the concentrated heat spreading across skin and the soft, wet sound of the fabric meeting flesh. The relief is real, but it hides the deeper weakness the body is sinking into. Brother Aramis reminds the novice, Brother Anselm, of a social curiosity. In earlier centuries, public baths were common, but had since fallen out of favor. People feared that bathing spread disease and moral corruption. Cleanliness was mostly limited to washing hands and face. The distrust of water, combined with crowded living, only worsened public health. Returning to his instruments, the monk decides to boil them, a step beyond rinsing in cold water, though far from modern sterilization. The scalpel and needles rattle lightly inside a small cauldron suspended over the hearth, steam rising with the smell of metal and smoke. The belief in purification through fire is ancient, and to Aramis this is a careful, almost sacred act. His thoughts drift to the idea of temperament, essential to medieval diagnosis. Everyone, it was taught, was born with a dominant humor, sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric or melancholic, and illness came from its excess. Isolde, he concludes, is naturally melancholic, ruled by black bile. That explains, he thinks, why her disease resists so stubbornly and why her treatment must be harsher. The entire course of healing must match temperament, diet, environment, even the temperature of the room. So Brother Eramus decides the infirmary must become warmer and drier to counter the cold, moist nature of black bile. He orders the doors closed and more candles lit, raising heat in the room. He removes Isolde's cold, damp bandages and replaces them with linen warmed by the fire. Feel the dry, rough cloth against inflamed skin and the faint smell of singed fabric. The heat causes discomfort, but to him it is the cooking needed to ripen the illness before it can be expelled. Disease, he believes, must first mature before it can be cured. He sits to rewrite her treatment, adding a tincture made with copper oxide, a green-blue mineral he sees as the opposite of black bile. If the humours are black, the cure must be green. Medieval medicine loved analogies. Colour, texture, similarity and contrast all dictated which substance would heal. Imagine the vivid, toxic hue of the liquid and the metallic bitterness Isolde will soon have to swallow. He remembers teachings from Jewish and Arab physicians, often more skilled in surgery and pharmacology than their Christian counterparts, but whose wisdom was sometimes dismissed or mistranslated out of prejudice. Though he reads Avicenna, he filters the lessons, accepting only what fits Greco-Roman humoral theory and discarding what feels too new or untraditional. Brother Eramus brings Isolde a small wrought-iron crucifix, cool and heavy in her palms. Pain, he tells himself, is a reminder of humility. The cold metal is a counterpoint to her fever, a spiritual anchor meant to bring acceptance and purity. For him, healing must touch the soul as well as the flesh. Before retiring, he makes one last round. Thibaut breathes slowly, evenly, too slowly. But to the monk, this is peace. He writes that regular breathing means the excess heat of blood has been purged. In reality, the shallow breaths are a sign of the body's deep collapse. But the quiet comforts him. He leaves the infirmary to the silent care of Sister Agnes and the flickering glow of oil lamps. The room is warmer now, filled with the faint scent of burned herbs, a place that would look, to an outsider, like the height of medieval healing. Only the truth remains. The bodies of Isolde and Thibaut are being pushed to the edge. Morning will reveal whether the monk's faith in humoral medicine brings victory or tragedy. Night settles over the abbey, heavy and still. The most honest sound in the entire room is the uneven breathing of the sick. The sun has fully set, and the lamplight inside the infirmary of Saint Félicien Abbey casts a trembling golden glow, too weak to chase away the damp shadows gathered in the corners. Sister Agnes, seated quietly beside the patients, is the lone watcher, and the air is thick with the smell of burned beeswax and bitter ointments. Night seems peaceful only on the surface. It hides the cycle of suffering imposed by the treatments. Brother Eramus returns after Compline, carrying a small clay brazier to raise the temperature in the room. He believes warmth is essential to mature the cold humours. The scent of burning charcoal spreads slowly through the air, making the room feel heavy and stifling. Yet the rising heat only worsens Isolde's dehydration, deepening her fever and sharpening her agony, a cruel paradox where intention and outcome run in opposite directions. He touches her skin and feels the fiery heat beneath it. Convinced the last bitter purge wasn't strong enough, he decides the body needs a more direct intervention, a warm enema of salted herbal water delivered through a hollow horn tube. Imagine the invasive sensation and sudden discomfort of hot liquid forced into the body, an act of humiliation and purification that was often the final resort in medieval medicine. Repeated enemas strip away what little nourishment and salts remain in Isolde's body, pushing her closer to collapse. But the monk interprets every reaction as proof that the evil humor is being driven out. To him, black bile is stubborn, an enemy that must be expelled by any means. His treatments grow harsher because his faith in humoral doctrine is unshakable. Turning to Thibault, Brother Aramis notices the pale skin and weak pulse. He prepares the final step of the regime ori, an external poultice of powdered gold mixed with olive oil, spread across the vein where the bloodletting was done at his ankle. He believes that the incorruptible nature of gold will seal the wound and keep the vital spirit from escaping. Feel the greasy texture of the golden paste, the faint shimmer catching the lamplight, a luxury laid against a poor man's fading skin. The monk whispers prayers over the poultice, consecrating the healing, convinced that spirit and matter have finally aligned for Thibault's recovery. The gold has no medical power, but to him it is hope itself. A curious practice in the 11th century involved traveling healers who used mandrake root as a crude anesthetic for small surgeries. The root, shaped vaguely like a human figure, was steeped in legends and superstition. When boiled and inhaled, it could knock a patient into a daze, but carried a terrifying risk of overdose. Brother Aramis avoids it entirely. He trusts poppy instead, believing mandrake to be pagan and dangerously powerful, preferring the scientific teachings of Galen. He sits in a corner watching his patients and begins reciting verses from a psalm, slow, rhythmic, and soothing. His voice fills the room with calm, a gentle song of order in a world of imbalance. Outwardly, there is serenity. Inwardly, the treatments remain violent. A faint odor rises from the blistered skin on Isolde's body. To Brother Aramis, it is the smell of putrid matter being expelled, proof that the vesicatory is working. In truth, the open blisters have become infected, the direct result of poor sanitation. He orders Sister Agnes to apply another layer of the mutton fat and ash salve, hoping it will dry out the decay, sealing the danger beneath a film of dirt. He recalls a curious fact about the new medical schools beginning to emerge in Europe, like the famous one in Salerno, where human dissection was forbidden. Most anatomical knowledge came from dissecting pigs or from ancient texts, which led to maps of the human body full of errors. The lack of true anatomical understanding was the source of countless mistakes in diagnosis and treatment. Brother Aramis rises and stretches, feeling the cold, damp air of the abbey, in contrast to the stifling warmth of the infirmary. He tosses more wood onto the fire and watches the flames flare and bend, consuming the wood just as he hopes they'll consume Isolde's black bile. The scent of burning timber fills the room, and the heat dries the throat. He rests a gentle hand on Thibault's hair, feeling the frailty beneath his touch and the weight of responsibility in his chest. His compassion is real. His devotion is sincere. But his ignorance shapes him into a tragic figure, a healer whose faith guides both his mercy and his harm. He prescribes a full day of rest for Thibault. No more bleeding, no more purging. It's a rare moment of mercy. Yet he orders the man to be fed only barley water and lettuce shoots, foods he believes to be cold and moist, meant to balance the hot and dry nature of the blood he has just purged. The diet is gentle, but offers no protein, no strength, nothing the anemia-stricken body desperately needs. When he returns to Isolde's bedside and sees silent tears running down her cheeks, he interprets them as a sign that her suffering has reached its peak, and that healing must be close. He kneels and prays for her, his calm, resonant voice filling the room. Prayer becomes the bridge between failed medicine and hope for divine intervention. The monk's serene contemplation of their fate is the last image of the night. He leaves them to the quiet of the abbey, unaware that their lives now hang not on the disease itself, but on the harshness of his own cures. The infirmary is a stage of faith and error, where devotion collides with ignorance, and healing is only a distant promise on the horizon of the 11th century. The peace that settles over the room is cold and terribly deceiving. The bell of Saint Félicien Abbey announces dawn with a slow, solemn chime. But Brother Aramis is nowhere near the infirmary. Instead, our view follows him to the farthest corner of the monastic complex, the dye house, a small stone annex where he prepares most of his ointments and potions. He moves with the weight of long experience, his body bent with exhaustion, his thin beard damp with morning dew. His footsteps echo over the wet stones of the cloister, a slow, methodical rhythm that mirrors his focused mind. Inside the dye house, the senses are overwhelmed at once. The air is thick with the pungent smell of sulphur, vinegar, and fermented herbs, mixed with the sweet traces of honey and resin. Brother Aramis is preparing a fresh batch of purgative for Isolde, convinced that she needs one final dose to expel the lingering black bile. He walks between shelves lined with ceramic jars and thick glass bottles, where the colors of the ingredients, the dull green of iron sulfate, the deep red of lead oxide, the bright yellow of saffron, form a dangerous chemical rainbow. Today, he is working with a root gathered in the forest, whose sap he believes to be a powerful diuretic, essential for flushing the toxic water from Isolde's body. He scrapes the root with a dull knife, the dry, granular sound of the blade, the only noise besides the soft bubbling of boiling water in a copper cauldron. Feel the rough, woody texture of the root under his fingers, and the earthy, acidic scent released as it is shaved apart. He remembers an old curiosity about monastic architecture. Many abbeys were built with clever latrine systems, flushed by running water from nearby streams. For the 11th century, it was a small luxury of hygiene, though Brother Aramis uses water from the very same stream to wash his medical tools, unaware of the danger. He smiles faintly at the ingenuity of his monastic predecessors, while steam rises from the cauldron and clouds the air. He mixes the ground root with a measure of wine alcohol, an extract he distills slowly and sees as a vital spirit capable of strengthening the herb. Wine alcohol did carry a mild antiseptic quality, though the monk uses it only to draw the essence from the plants. The sharp, alcoholic fumes blend with the herbal scent, a chemical contrast that signals potency. He lets the liquid simmer over low heat, watching its color shift from pale brown to a deep emerald green, proof in his eyes that the remedy is finally maturing. The fire crackles gently beneath the copper cauldron, and the warmth radiating from the brazier is the only comfort in the cold stone chamber. He settles onto a small wooden stool, waiting for the brew to thicken, one quiet moment of contemplation in his relentless rhythm as healer. Brother Aramis checks an old jar of salve he made weeks earlier, a mixture of pork fat and sulphur used for scabies and other ailments. He lifts the lid, and the rancid reek of spoiled fat and rotting sulphur hits him instantly. He covers his nose in disgust. Without refrigeration or any understanding of food preservation, such ointments spoiled quickly and often became sources of infection instead of cures. He decides to throw the spoiled contents away, dumping them into a chute that leads straight into the stream under the abbey, unwittingly contaminating the same water used for drinking and cooking. In medieval life, polluted waterways were constant, silent dangers, as human waste and medical refuse were poured directly into the current. In the stillness, he recalls a tale from a wandering traveller who spoke of a renowned physician at a royal court, able to diagnose every illness by touch alone. Brother Eramus sighs. His own knowledge is bound to books and rituals, not miraculous intuition. He feels a flicker of frustration at Isolde's persistence in illness, but his faith in his methods remains unshaken. He picks up a small bronze scale to weigh the exact amount of salt needed for the diuretic, following the instructions of an ancient text that prescribed a precise ratio of salt to each pound of a patient's body weight. The delicate metallic click of the scale balancing is a sound of precision and order, an attempt to impose mathematics on the chaos of the human body. He believes the salt will enhance the root's effect, forcing the body to expel the excess cold water he imagines swelling inside Isolde's tissues. In reality, her swelling is a sign of weakness and possible kidney failure, and the salt will only worsen her dehydration, but he has no way of knowing. He pours the mixture into a clay pot to cool, feeling the natural chill of the stone chamber, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth of the infirmary. The difference in temperature feels like a reminder of the delicate balance he tries to force upon his patients, heating them to fight the cold nature of black bile, cooling them to tame the heat of blood. He remembers another curious belief from medieval medicine. Some physicians added a touchstone or philosopher's stone to certain elixirs. While alchemists sought transmutation, some healers thought the stone's purity could cure any illness. Brother Eramus considers it superstition, but still keeps a small piece of quartz to purify the water he uses. At last, the new diuretic is ready, a dark brown-green liquid with the strong scent of earth and alcohol. He pours it into an opaque glass bottle. The sight of the concentrated potion becomes the center of the scene, the aggressive remedy that will be given to Isolde. He holds it with quiet satisfaction, believing he now carries the final blow against her illness. Brother Eramus leaves the dye house, and the perspective shifts back to the cloister where morning light has grown brighter, the air fresh and wet. Birds sing along the roof beams, their voices a peaceful contrast to the silence of the previous night. He walks slowly, the weight of the bottle in his hand equal to the weight of his responsibility and his unwavering belief. He pauses for a moment, watching the simple life of the abbey unfold around him, monks tending the garden and heading to the scriptorium. He feels the tranquility of monastic order and believes the same order can be imposed on the human body by manipulating humors. He closes his eyes, drawing in a slow breath of morning air. He continues toward the infirmary, comforted by the belief that Thibaut is recovering under the regime Ori. Brother Eramus sees himself as an instrument of providence, a guardian of ancient knowledge. His slow pace is a deliberate gesture of serenity. The poetic final image is the monk stepping back into the infirmary, bringing the light of morning and the dark bottle of diuretic, the promise and the risk held together in a single act. He is about to shape Isolde's fate once more, the closing movement in a cycle of harsh treatments mistaken for healing. The door opens. The familiar scent of wax and illness greets him. He enters with calm resolve, ready for his next intervention. The room is silent, waiting. The potion is his color, and the body of the young woman is his canvas. Brother Eramus steps into the infirmary, and the movement of his woolen robes brushing across the stone floor is the only sound in the quiet room. Morning light settles over Isolde, revealing skin stretched tight and faintly yellow from mercury poisoning and the slow exhaustion of her kidneys. The monk approaches with the freshly prepared diuretic, and its sharp, salty, root-heavy smell reaches Isolde, a scent that warns of more pain to come. He is utterly convinced that this is the key, the final push that will force the black bile to dissolve into her urine. He instructs Sister Agnes to lift Isolde so she can drink it. Swallowing is a silent agony. The liquid is salty, earthy, bitter, and she forces it down, feeling it burn in her raw, weakened stomach. The sensory and emotional impact of the remedy is overwhelming. A reminder that medieval healing was a constant battle between the body and the medicine meant to save it. To Brother Aramis, her grimace and nausea are reassuring signs. If her body rejects the taste, then surely it must also be rejecting the illness. He turns to Tybalt. The peasant remains heavy and unresponsive, and so the monk insists on absolute rest, but adds a new step. The inhalation of aromatic smoke to purify the air. He lights a small brazier filled with rosemary and sage. Their sharp, resinous scent spreads through the ward, a fragrance he believes can drive away the miasmas of fever. A curious fact about medieval hospital architecture was that many monastic infirmaries were built near streams so waste could be flushed away easily. It was a practical engineering solution, but the same streams also carried contamination right back to the abbey. Feel the damp air seeping through the cracks of the windows, carrying hints of the river below, the very water that receives the waste from the dye house. Brother Aramis checks the ointments used on Tybalt's wounds, which still refuse to heal. He takes up a jar of ash and oil salve, only to find it rancid and clotted. He throws it into the same disposal chute that leads to the stream, unaware that rotting fat carried disease just as silently as poison. He replaces it with something gentler, a poultice of bread and honey. The warm, soft mixture is sweet-smelling and sticky, and when it touches Tybalt's irritated skin, the relief is immediate. Honey, one of the few truly effective antibacterial remedies of the age, helps him without the monk ever knowing why. Brother Aramis glances at Isolde and sees that her skin has become slick with sweat. To him, this is triumphant proof. The diuretic is drawing out the toxic water. The heat of her body, the salty smell of sweat, these are signs of victory in his mind. But in truth, the sweat is draining the last electrolytes from her failing system, pushing her closer to collapse. He adds yet another layer to Thibault's care, rhythmic massage, using oil perfumed with lavender and rosemary to reactivate the circulation of blood and prevent it from becoming stagnant. Feel the warm, steady pressure of his hands on weak muscles, the smooth glide of scented oil, the brief comfort of human touch. It does not cure him, but it is one of the few moments of genuine kindness in this room. He returns to Isolde's bedside and contemplates the pale skin, the purple marks from leeches, the raw lesions from the vesicatory. The monk thinks about the power of numbers, how medieval treatments were often scheduled in sacred groups of 3, 4, or 7, numbers believed to reflect cosmic harmony. He writes in his parchment, "Isolde will receive her next dose in 3 hours. Tybalt's honey poultice will be changed 7 times a day." Mathematics becomes his attempt at certainty, a way to impose scientific order where only faith exists. Brother Aramis steps outside briefly to gather herbs. The cold breath of the abbey greets him, stone-chilled by morning air. Leaves rustle, and the peaceful sound contrasts sharply with the silence of suffering inside. This brief moment of nature feels almost like mercy. He returns with fresh nettle leaves which he will boil into a new poultice. He believes the sting of nettle will pull the illness outward. Feel the coarse, stinging texture of the leaves, the sharp green scent released as they are crushed. Another harsh remedy in an already brutal cycle. The monk pauses to admire the faint gleam of gold on Tybalt's ankle poultice. To him, the noble metal is perfection, an incorruptible seal against decay. The symbolism comforts him. He reflects on the weight of his calling and the inevitability of suffering in medieval life. He remembers a story of a hermit who healed with nothing but blessed water and prayer, a method Brother Aramis once dismissed as too simple, though in truth it often harmed far less than his own. He returns to the hearth, boiling nettle leaves into a dark green paste. Steam rises, carrying a sharp herbal sting through the room. When he applies the nettle poultice to Isolde's already wounded skin, the burning pain is immediate. A quiet climax of this chapter, where devotion and ignorance meet under the calm mask of care. Brother Aramis steps back, certain that healing is close. His calm, retreating footsteps are the last sound of this shift in perspective. The infirmary settles into stillness once more, but inside the fragile bodies of its patients, the battle continues, between medicine and survival, faith and biology. Silence returns, heavy and expectant. Brother Aramis pauses in a simple yet telling gesture, the center of our focus now. He is examining Isolde's feces, a practice known as scatology, the inspection of bodily waste for signs of disease. He crouches beside a ceramic vessel, and the hot, acrid smell rising from it is sharp and unpleasant, but the monk faces it with the same reverence he would give a sacred manuscript. In medieval medicine, the color, consistency, and odor of waste were considered direct revelations of the internal humors and the success of purgations. Using a small wooden spatula, he inspects the texture, noting the dark color and oily consistency, signs he interprets as proof that the black bile and the remnants of mercury are finally leaving her body. Brother Aramis allows himself a small, quiet smile. This is the first clear indication in his mind that his aggressive treatments are forcing the impurity out. His relief is a reflection of his unwavering faith in the method. Our deeper contemplation rests on the wooden spatula itself. He wipes it on a coarse cloth and tucks it back into his belt. The tool is simple, unrefined, and entirely unsterilized, a symbol of the unhygienic diagnostic practices of the time. The same spatula that touched putrid waste will soon be used to handle ointments and poultices. The small human tragedy is in that repeated, contaminating motion. Brother Aramis shifts his attention to Thibault, still lethargic, and notices a new detail, the faint grinding of the peasant's teeth as he sleeps. The monk interprets this as a sign of intestinal worms, a common medieval belief linking nighttime tooth grinding to parasitic infestation. He decides to prepare a vermifuge, a worm remedy made from crushed pumpkin seeds mixed with goat's milk, a simple folk remedy he learned from the village women. The sweet, earthy smell of milk and seeds is a pleasant contrast to the harsh odors of the ward, a brief sensory moment of relief. A true curiosity of the era was the use of urine from certain animals, particularly hedgehogs, as a purgative for worms due to its acidity and supposed power to burn out infestations. Brother Aramis knows of this recipe, but finds it crude and too close to magic. He favors his herbal mixture instead. The monk leans over Isolde and examines her eyes, noting the yellow tint of the sclera and the dilation of her pupils. He interprets the yellowing as a residue of yellow bile that has not yet been purged, and the dilation as a sign of internal agony. In his logic, the black bile is not the only humor in rebellion. Now yellow bile must be expelled as well. He opens a small wooden cabinet, and the soft, papery sound of drawers sliding is the only noise. He takes out a glass vial filled with a fine, pale yellow powder, ground wild saffron root, his chosen cure for yellow bile because it is dry and warm, and above all yellow. Feel the fine, silk-like texture of the powder between the fingers, the sharp, exotic scent of wild saffron, a spice that conjures faraway lands. His faith in the sympathy of colors, yellow for yellow bile, is a poetic and flawed logic that shapes his pharmacy. The appearance of a remedy matters more to him than its chemistry. He mixes the powder with white wine and feeds it to Isolde, whose weakness leaves her no strength to refuse. The strong alcoholic taste and the slightly gritty texture slide down her throat in another forced act of healing. Brother Aramis assures her that this is the last purification, after which her body will be free of toxins. As he watches her face, he notices a faint tremor in her hands, a sign he interprets as the agitation of her melancholic temperament being driven out by the medicine. He cannot know that the tremor is actually a symptom of mercury poisoning and the collapse of her nervous system. Then comes a gentle, poetic gesture. He wets a clean linen cloth in a cool herbal broth and wipes her forehead. The cool, damp touch is a moment of softness, a brief pause of serenity in the cycle of suffering. He then turns back to Thibault, believing that the fight against parasites is nearly over. In his mind, cleansing the body of worms also cleanses the soul, freeing the peasant from physical and moral impurity alike. Brother Aramis ends this first moment with a melancholy kind of serenity. He believes he is doing everything a healer can. His sense of belonging in the painful cycle of cure and purification feels complete. The infirmary is a stage of devoted ignorance, and the monk, in his private, reflective posture, is its quiet protagonist. After giving the worm remedy, Brother Aramis turns his attention back to Isolde's mouth, studying the color and moisture of her tongue, another essential diagnostic habit in the medicine of humors. He notices that her tongue is dry and velvety, with a shade he interprets as black, proof in his mind that the black bile is still present. He reads this dryness not as dehydration from purgatives and diuretics, but as the very nature of bile revealing itself on the tongue, a mirror of excessive inward heat. Feel the dry weight in your own mouth, an echo of her suffering. He decides that the only way to counter the dryness and heat of black bile is by intervening directly in the humor of blood, which he now believes has grown thick and tainted by the heat of the bile. The monk prepares an infusion of watercress and wine vinegar, a cold, acidic liquid. He forces Isolde to swish inside her mouth. The sharp sourness of the vinegar, its burning smell, is a violent contrast to the sweetness of honey and the bitterness of purgatives, another shock to the senses, meant to jolt the body toward balance. A small human story appears here, tucked inside the memory of Brother Aramis himself. As a young man, he once suffered from a relentless fever and was cured by a peasant woman who pressed a poultice of cold clay against his chest. Without speaking the memory aloud, he repeats it through action. The body must be cooled. He finds a small slate stone, cold and slightly damp, and places it gently on Isolde's stomach. The weight and chill of the stone offer a temporary relief to fevered skin, a quiet union of folk wisdom and monastic practice. A poetic curiosity of the time was the use of stones, precious or not, in medicine, not only for their color, but for their natural temperature and hardness. Slate, tied to earth and known for its coldness, was believed to draw heat and illness outward. The monk's action is rooted in this symbolic history, even if only in idea. He turns to Thibault once more. The peasant sleeps a little more peacefully, though his breath remains thin. Brother Aramis notices how Thibault still clutches a small wooden crucifix in his hands, simple, worn, and the only thing the man can hold on to. Feeling the calm that faith gives the patient, the monk decides that the body needs symbolic nourishment, since real nourishment is scarce. He prepares a thin lentil soup, an easy food he believes Thibault can digest. The soft, earthy aroma fills the air, and the warmth of the broth against Thibault's lips is a small moment of comfort, gentler, quieter than the brutal treatments that came before. The gentle sipping sound is the sound of life trying to return. Brother Aramis notes the response with quiet satisfaction. In his mind, the worm remedy has worked. The stomach is ready to be fed. His intimate focus on Thibault's recovery stands in contrast to the slow fading of Isolde, creating a soft tension between hope and despair. He bends over Isolde again. Faced with her extreme weakness, he decides that the final weapon against black bile must be the scarificator, an instrument of tiny blades used to make shallow cuts, followed by cupping glasses placed over the wounds. He believes that black bile, being the densest humour of all, must be drawn out through the skin. Our attention narrows to the scarificator itself, a small, cold, cruel piece of metal. Feel the chill of its surface and the quiet unease it carries. Brother Aramis works with slow precision, making tiny cuts in skin already inflamed. To him, this is not violence. It is a necessary ritual of healing. There is a gentle, terrible calm as he sets the cups over the wounds, the soft sound of air being sucked out, the faint metallic scent of blood rising to the surface. This is the closing moment of his intervention. For the monk, this forced purification is the last road to life. His part of the cycle feels complete. He has done everything he can. Now the body must respond or fail on its own. After the harsh treatment given to Isolde, Brother Aramis leaves the infirmary and walks toward the herb garden, and the narrative quietly widens, connecting the suffering of his patients to the larger life of the abbey. The morning sun is now high, and the monk devotes himself to his methodical harvest of herbs, a daily ritual that forms the foundation of his entire pharmacopoeia. He moves slowly between the beds, and the fresh, green scent of rue, mint and wormwood clings to his woolen robes, a sharp contrast to the heavy air of the infirmary. Today, he searches for copperleaf, a plant whose crushed foliage releases a green pigment he'll use to prepare an anti-blennorrhagic ointment, yet another sign that illness travels silently through the monastery. He stops beside Brother Lambert, a younger monk with a melancholy face, who is digging the soil to plant new seeds. Lambert is the symbol of the individual bound to the collective. He's responsible for preparing the monks' meals, and through that, the guardian of the community's diet and health. Brother Aramis approaches him and begins to speak about food for the sick, insisting on the need for cold and moist foods for hot temperaments and dry and hot foods for those who are cold. The muffled sound of Lambert's hoe breaking the earth is the only noise between them. The healer monk then drifts into a quiet reflection about monastic economy in the Middle Ages. He explains that the abbey, beyond being a center of faith, is an agricultural powerhouse, with wide fields of grain and vineyards that ensure their self-sufficiency and allow charitable medical care for peasants like Thibault. The wealth of the monastery lies not only in its land, but in its specialized knowledge, distilling alcohol, preparing medicines, and trading them with other orders. Feel the rough texture of the soil and the damp clay scent rising from the ground. Lambert works. Brother Aramis shifts his focus again, speaking now about the importance of hygiene in preventing disease, a conversation full of good intentions and contradictions. He tells Lambert to boil all water used for cooking the sick, believing the fire purifies the humor of the water, unaware that this is actually what kills the bacteria. Yet he overlooks the lack of cleanliness in his own tools and the handling of bodily waste. The small human story of Lambert, who often suffers from headaches, is a quiet reminder that even in a controlled environment, health is fragile. Returning to his concern for Isolde, the monk decides the next treatment should be smoke, something he believes gentler than purgatives and diuretics. He instructs Lambert to burn poppy seeds mixed with incense in a small clay burner so that the narcotic smoke will wrap around the young woman. The heavy sweetness of poppy smoke blended with sacred incense is a sensory shock meant to lull her into sleep, a remedy that feels as much ritual as medicine. He watches Lambert carefully collect the seeds, and the soft, dry sound of them falling into a small linen pouch creates a calm rhythm. Brother Eramus remembers a religious curiosity from the time. Monks often invoked Saints Cosmas and Damian, patrons of physicians before performing risky procedures, weaving faith directly into the act of healing. Brother Eramus takes a leaf of copper leaf and presses it between his fingers. The cool, velvety surface gives him a sense of belonging to the plant world. When he crushes it, a deep green pigment stains his fingertips, soon to be mixed with olive oil and beeswax for ointment. The earthy green scent contrasts sharply with the rancid smell of sickness that still clings to him from the infirmary. His thoughts drift to Thibaut once more. The peasant remains in deep sleep, and the monk continues to read this as a sign of healing. He decides Thibaut needs bone restoration, and the collective community enters the story again. He instructs Lambert to prepare a fortified broth of pork bones and vegetables, boiled for hours to extract the vital essence of the bones. The rich, salty aroma he imagines is a comfort in itself. Their conversation comes to an end, and the narrative widens once more, this time into the vast panorama of the abbey's garden. It is the medicinal lung of the entire region, the source of healing and, paradoxically, the source of many dangerous ingredients. The monk's slow pace and gentle voice fade back into the silent cloister as he prepares for the next phase of treatment, carrying the herbs and the fragile promise of sleep back to Isolde. Brother Eramus returns to the infirmary, carrying the herbs and the promise of sleep for Isolde. The soft sound of his footsteps is accompanied by the fresh, sharp scent of rosemary and sage that clings to him from the garden. He goes straight to the hearth to prepare the poppy smoke, the final element he believes will be more of a balm for the young woman suffering than another aggressive treatment. He burns the poppy seeds in a small clay dish, mixing them with a bit of resin and incense. The sweet, heavy, narcotic aroma rises in a thin blue ribbon of smoke, which he carefully guides toward the head of Isolde's bed. The quiet human story that unfolds here is the healer's instinctive desire to ease pain, even when the sedative only dulls the symptoms of her decline. The quiet human story that unfolds here is the healer's instinctive desire to ease pain, even when the sedative only dulls the symptoms of her decline. He watches Isolde's slow, passive movements as she inhales the smoke, her eyelids growing heavier, her breathing settling into a deep and languid rhythm. He feels a small satisfaction at having given her a moment of peace, convinced that sleep is the body's way of restoring itself when turbulent humors are kept at bay. The deceptive serenity that settles over the room is a relief for both healer and patient, exhausted by the endless cycle of purgatives. The monk links the individual to the collective once more as he recalls a story about public health in medieval towns. Villagers burning aromatic herbs in the streets to chase away the miasmas of plague. The perfumed smoke, thick and overwhelming, was their only defense against the invisible enemy. Brother Eramus now reproduces a miniature version of that ritual in his own little corner of the world. He turns his attention to Thibaut. The peasant wakes briefly, and the monk instructs him to chew strips of willow bark, an herbal remedy he uses for headaches and muscle pain. Imagine the bitter, fibrous taste in the mouth, a humble medicine that, though Eramus doesn't know it, contains salicin, the natural precursor to what would someday become aspirin. It is one of the rare moments when the monk's practice brushes against true medicinal science. Thibaut chews slowly, his expression one of tired acceptance, a quiet surrender to pain as a part of the cure. Brother Eramus feels the devotion in the man's resignation and encourages him, saying the strength of nature is in his hands. The rough texture of the bark is a subtle contrast to the monk's gentle touch. A memory of religious custom rises in Brother Erasmus's mind. He explains to Sister Agnes that fasting was seen as purification for both body and soul, and that the restricted diets of his patients serve a double purpose, easing the body and sanctifying the spirit. The quiet human story of fasting is where theology and medicine meet inside the abbey walls. He looks up, noticing how the sunlight has shifted, casting a warm golden glow across the small iron crucifix in Thibault's hands. The cold, heavy metal stands against the heat of fever and the fire of the brazier, a symbol of endurance he hopes the peasant will absorb. Brother Erasmus returns to Isolde and sees that her breathing, even under the poppy smoke, remains irregular. He decides the black bile must now be fought with intense, localized heat. He prepares a strong mustard plaster and applies it to the soles of her feet, believing the illness can be drawn away from the body's vital center. The sharp, biting smell of mustard fills the air, a final sensory shock, stinging and aggressive, colliding with the sweetness of poppy and the herbal freshness of rosemary. The burning heat in Isolde's feet becomes his last attempt to force the purgation, a necessary violence in the name of healing. Brother Erasmus ends this widening of the narrative with a reflection on time. He believes that curing a body is a slow act, demanding patience and perseverance. He withdraws from the infirmary, leaving behind the heavy silence of Isolde's sedated sleep and the quiet struggle of Thibault. The monk's slow steps and gentle presence return to the stillness of the cloister, and serenity settles again, silent, expectant, and fragile. The bell of the Abbey of Saint-Félicien rings for sext, midday, and a contemplative pause settles over the narrative. Brother Erasmus sits on a wooden bench in the cloister, beneath the harsh noon sun, no longer in the infirmary, but inhabiting a moment of slowed rhythm and silence. In his hands, he holds a small parchment notebook bound in leather, where he writes down his observations about the patients. The smell of gall ink and dry leather clings to his fingers, a scholarly scent that stands in quiet contrast to the odor of sickness. He gives himself over to a gentle cultural observation of a detail in the cloister, the intricate carved relief on one of the stone columns depicting St. George battling the dragon. He feels the rough, cold surface beneath his fingertips, and the precision of the carving becomes a symbol of his own struggle against the invisible evil of disease. The contemplation of art offers him a moment of serenity, a place where he searches for order amid the disorder illness brings. A soft memory returns of medieval pilgrims who traveled great distances to touch the relics of a healing saint. Brother Erasmus reflects on the devotion behind such gestures, recognizing that hope and faith were often the greatest allies in the absence of scientific understanding. The gentle chirping of birds in the courtyard is the only sound, a subtle contrast to the groans that fill the infirmary. His focus shifts to the delicate balance of the humours, the central idea he strives to impose on the bodies of his patients. He notes in his parchment that the nature of black bile is cold and dry, and that its cure must come from the opposite, something warm and moist. This quiet, philosophical reflection guides his next step. He must stop the purgatives and diuretics, and instead hydrate and nourish Isolde. He recalls an authentic historical custom, the use of wine in medieval medicine. Beyond its role as a solvent for herbs, wine was often given as a tonic and pain reliever, believed to warm and nourish the body, while its alcohol, though he does not know why, could kill certain bacteria. He decides that Isolde must receive pomegranate wine, which he considers the most nutritious and well-balanced of all. A slow, poetic gesture follows. Brother Erasmus closes his eyes and breathes in deeply, the warm scent of sun-baked stone and a faint trace of incense floating through the cloister. The feeling is comforting, even as doubt lingers. He senses the weight of the parchment in his hands, an object that symbolizes both his responsibility and the limit of his knowledge. His thoughts move to Thibaut, whose quiet struggle with weakness troubles him. Brother Aramis decides the peasant needs external warmth and internal moisture. He writes that Thibaut is to receive a warm foot bath with salts, a popular treatment he adopts to soften tension and draw heat from the body's center toward the extremities. A gentle cultural reflection returns as he thinks about the barber surgeons, often frowned upon by the church for their practical approach and their habit of drawing blood, yet they were the only ones who performed surgical procedures. The contrast between learned medicine and practical medicine is a quiet source of unease within him. Brother Aramis rises from the bench, and the soft rustle of his wool tunic against the stone marks the end of the contemplative pause. He makes his way to the kitchen to prepare the pomegranate wine, a transition back into action, but with a slower and gentler rhythm. Brother Aramis walks toward the kitchen, and the change of setting widens the senses. The smell of dried spices and wood smoke fills the room, blending with the warm scent of grains and stewed fruit. The monk focuses on preparing the pomegranate wine for Isolde, performing the task with the slow, serene rhythm of someone carrying out a gentle alchemy. He crushes the ripe pomegranates in a stone mortar, and the wet, grainy sound of the fruit being ground is the only noise besides the crackling of the hearth. He adds honey and cinnamon to the pomegranate juice, and a small human story reveals itself in his gesture, a belief in sympathetic colors and flavors. The ruby red of the fruit and the warmth of the wine are, to him, perfect opposites to black bile, cold and dark, and the sweetness stands in delicate contrast to the bitter purgations Isolde endured. Feel the sweet, sharp, alcoholic perfume of the tonic as he strains it through a fine linen cloth, separating the liquid from the pulp. Brother Aramis pauses to reflect on bread, the foundation of medieval diet. He recalls that dark rye bread was the daily nourishment of peasants like Thibaut, though physicians considered it harder to digest than soft white wheat bread, reserved for nobles and the gravely ill. He decides that Thibaut shall receive a thin wheat loaf the next day, a small luxury in the peasant's diet, which the monk interprets as both nourishment and honor. He returns to the infirmary, his pace slower now, a contrast to the urgency of the earlier treatments. In his hands, he carries the pomegranate wine in a small cup. The deep red liquid glows under the lamplight, a quiet, poetic image of invitation and redemption. He approaches Isolde, and the cool touch of the cup against her feverish hand is a gentle contact. The slow, poetic gesture comes as he helps her drink. The warmth and sweetness of the wine are an immediate comfort to her dry throat. The small human story of Isolde is the return of sweetness to a body that knew only bitterness and pain, a forced moment of serenity. The monk notes that her sweating has stopped, a sign he interprets as the end of violent purging and the beginning of calming hydration. Turning to Thibaut, Brother Aramis prepares the warm foot bath with salts. He pours the water into a wooden basin, and the soft, warm splash is a subtle contrast to the chill lingering in the air. The heat of the water against the peasant's feet brings instant relief to tense muscles, a treatment of comfort meant to restore vital warmth. A quiet, historical curiosity lingers in his mind. The medieval belief that rainwater, collected under certain phases of the moon, was purer than any other water and used to wash wounds or soothe infected eyes. Though Brother Aramis uses well water, he still carries the same logic of purity in his ritual of healing baths. He leans over Thibaut and inhales the scent of warm water and salt rising from the basin, a smell of cleanliness, of rest. He ends the contemplative pause with a sense of duty fulfilled, convinced that this shift in treatment, from harshness to nourishment, from violence to calm, is the key to recovery. The poetic image that closes this chapter is quiet and almost tender. The infirmary bathed in soft lamplight, with Isolde sleeping under the gentle influence of pomegranate wine, and Thibault relaxing his feet in warm water. The subtle contrast between the weakness of their bodies and the peacefulness of the room is exactly the rest the monk hoped for. He withdraws, carrying with him a serenity born of renewed hope. The abbey bell rings for the morning wake-up, but our new perspective moves us away from the infirmary. We now follow a secondary character, Brother Anselm, the young novice, who becomes our new angle of observation. Anselm is in the monastic library, a vast hall with high ceilings and the scent of old parchment and wax. He is on a mission given by Brother Eramus to search for ancient recipes of poultices to treat Isolde's wounds, which he has quietly noticed are infected, something the older monk attributes to slow purgation. From Anselm's point of view, there is both fear and fascination. He does not share Eramus's blind faith in the methods of the ancients. Instead, there is a mild, persistent unease in him as he watches the young woman deteriorate. He bends over a heavy, leather-bound volume, the Book of Ointments, and the soft, dry sound of parchment pages turning is the only noise. Feel the cold, rough texture of the leather cover beneath his fingers, and the faint smell of mold and old ink rising from the book. Brother Anselm reads a brief parallel mini-story about a Roman physician who treated battlefield wounds with a mixture of vinegar and excrement, a practice he finds revolting. Then he finds a recipe that intrigues him, a poultice made of spiderwebs and olive oil, which the text claims can stop bleeding and speed healing. The small human story in this recipe is the instinct borrowed from nature, how a spider's web can halt the flow of a liquid, and how that idea was carried into human medicine. He shifts his perspective and decides not to use the recipe of webs. Instead, he looks for something that smells of cleanness and purity. He discovers a curiosity about the use of freshly shorn sheep's wool, soaked in wine alcohol, and applied directly to the wound. Brother Eramus uses wine alcohol but dismisses wool as filthy. Anselm feels caught between the master's tradition and his own practical sense of hygiene. New sensations sharpen as he thinks of the infirmary. He remembers the lingering smell of mercury, the sting of mustard, and the touch of dirty instruments he washed at the basin. He feels like the quiet guardian of cleanliness, and this is his small, silent rebellion against the ignorance around him. He decides he will boil a fresh linen cloth in the kitchen before placing it on Isolde's skin, an instinctive gesture of asepsis. He returns to the parchment and finds a curiosity about medieval scribes. He reads that many scribes, when copying medical texts, subtly changed the recipes to match whatever ingredients their monasteries possessed or removed elements they considered magical. Feel the weight of history in Anselm's hands, the unconscious guardian of centuries of mistranslations and editing errors passed down as medical wisdom. Anselm rises and walks to the library window. The fresh morning air and the soft sound of wind stirring the trees calm him. He looks down into the inner courtyard, its perfect architectural symmetry, and feels a quiet unease, the peace of the stone cloister standing in stark contrast to the chaos of sickness consuming Isolde. He decides to return to the infirmary and fulfill his duty. He does not carry the recipe of spiderwebs, but he carries the idea of boiled linen and the memory of the pomegranate wine, one of the few treatments he believes has helped. His small gesture of charity appears when he stops in the kitchen and takes an apple from the fruit bowl to bring to Isolde. a simple, fresh food he hopes will soothe her parched mouth. Brother Anselm returns to the infirmary, and our shift in perspective allows us to notice details that Brother Erasmus's blind faith can't see. He carries not only the boiled linen, but also the apple he picked from the kitchen, a simple object that represents nourishment and the care Isolde's body truly needs, in contrast to the harsh purgatives. The fresh, tart scent of the apple is a new aroma, cutting gently through the odors of illness and herbs. He approaches Isolde's bed. Her exhausted body rests under the lingering effects of poppy smoke. Anselm feels a soft unease as he notices the open wounds left by the scarificator and the dark bruises from the cups. Quietly, he chooses practicality and compassion. Instead of applying the rancid ointment, he cleans the wounds with the boiled linen, still warm, a small act of instinctive cleanliness performed quickly and silently. The warm, gentle touch of linen against Isolde's irritated skin makes her stir faintly. Anselm shifts his focus and decides to offer the apple. A small human story unfolds in this simplicity. Though she can barely drink the fortified wine, she is able to hold the cool, damp fruit. The soft, crisp sound of her bite is a sound of life and nourishment, a fragile contrast to the silence of sickness. The novice feels the weight of responsibility in his hands. He knows Brother Erasmus would be displeased. An apple is a cold and moist food that, in humoral logic, could worsen black bile. He hides the apple core beneath Isolde's blanket, a gentle act of rebellion against rigid doctrine. This is the brief parallel story. Book knowledge, Erasmus, against practical instinct, Anselm. He turns to Thibault and, seeing the peasant's deep weakness, decides to change the footbath water, now cold, replacing it with warm, fresh water. The heat against Thibault's feet brings instant sensory relief, and Anselm feels a quiet warmth of hope as the man relaxes. The object of his attention is the water itself, a symbol of life that he tries to keep as warm and clean as possible. Anselm glances at one of Erasmus's parchments and reads a historical curiosity about treating melancholy. The text suggests that for black bile, the patient should be placed in direct sunlight and exposed to gentle music. So, he shifts the angle of the infirmary, opening the small wooden window wider, letting a thin beam of sunlight fall across Isolde's face. The gentle warmth of the sun is an immediate relief. The novice remembers a Gregorian chant sung during prime and hums it softly, a rhythmic, serene sound that fills the stillness. The small human story in this chant is the use of faith and art as medicine, a treatment more intuitive than the humoral violence of Brother Erasmus. Serenity settles into the room. Anselm finishes his quiet vigil, feeling that the real cure does not lie only in purgation, but in simple care and nourishment. He takes Isolde's purgative vial and hides it under a pile of cloths, one final protective gesture against the violence of medicine. Then he withdraws, leaving the infirmary scented with apple, incense, and cleanliness, a poetic contrast to what came before. Our new perspective leaves us with a calm hope that if the body is no longer attacked, it may find its own way back toward healing. Brother Erasmus returns to the infirmary, and the narrative rhythm shifts into a sensory amplification, capturing the room and the subtle changes in the patients. He pauses at the doorway, and the first amplified sense is smell. The sharp, citrus-like scent of the apple Anselm gave Isolde mixes with the soft aroma of burnt sage and the faint, metallic, sickly odor that still lingers, a layered contrast of life and suffering. He does not notice the apple, but the fresh aroma pleases him. He approaches Isolde, and the second amplified sense is touch. He places his hand on her forehead and feels the fever still burning beneath the skin. But her flesh is less tense, more humid now, thanks to the pomegranate wine. He interprets this moisture as a sign that the body is finally sweating the illness out. His gentle touch on her cheek becomes an act of quiet hope. He notices Isolde's movement, how she can now turn her head with more ease, and the amplified sound is her breathing, deeper, more rhythmic, softened by sleep and temporary relief. That slow, steady sound comforts the monk, who reads it as evidence that the lung humour, phlegm, is returning to balance. Brother Eramus focuses on the third amplified sense, sight. He studies the items near Thibault's bed and notices the poultice of honey and bread, now yellowed and sticky. The small human story in his mind is the nourishing power of honey, drawing impurities outward and sealing the cut from the bloodletting. A medieval memory comes to him. He explains to Sister Agnes that in older monasteries, barley bread was the food of choice for the sick, believed to be lighter than wheat and easier to digest without burdening the stomach. He instructs her to prepare a barley broth for Isolde, pure, simple nourishment. The monk shifts perspective again, turning toward the fourth amplified sense, thermal sensation. He feels the soft warmth radiating from the hearth and the subtle contrast between the warm air and his cool hand. The warmth delights him. Heat, he believes, is the ally of healing against the cold nature of black bile. Brother Eramus turns his attention to Thibault, just as the peasant slowly awakens. Thibault whispers for water, the soft, hoarse sound of his voice a small, human story of thirst and weakness. The monk, realizing the previous restriction of water was an error, in his mind a tactical failure in purgation, decides to give him fresh barley water, a gesture of relief and nourishment. He ends the sensory amplification with a poetic gesture. He looks toward the sunbeam Anselm left streaming through the open window. The light rests on a ceramic jar in the corner, where he notices the yellow saffron powder he used in Isolde's purging. The sight of the dry powder reassures him, proof in his belief that the remedy has acted and the evil has been expelled, even if pain remains. Brother Eramus moves toward the hearth, and a quiet human subplot unfolds, the longing to begin again. He kneels beside the fire while preparing a fresh poultice of cool, damp clay, an inversion of everything he preached earlier about heat, yet one he now justifies as necessary to pull the fire out of Isolde's body. He kneads the clay with his hands, and the cold, moist earth is exactly the sensation he believes her burning skin needs. The amplified sound is his murmured prayers, whispered steadily over the clay, a soft, rhythmic chant that blends medicine with the sacred. To him, the blessing matters as much as the coldness of the earth. He seeks a bridge between soil and heaven in the pursuit of healing. He turns his gaze back to Isolde, and the amplified sense becomes sight, the open cuts left by the scarificator. The incisions have not begun to close, which he interprets as proof that the rotting matter of black bile is refusing to let the wounds heal. Convinced that the cold earth will neutralize the fiery infection, he spreads the clay directly across the open skin. A historical curiosity flickers across the narrative. Some healers of the time used powdered, dried mushrooms to stop bleeding and prevent infection. Brother Eramus calls such methods magic, rejecting them in favor of humoral logic. Yet his own practice, pressing unsterilized clay into open wounds, carries an invisible danger that deepens the peril of his cure. He shifts his focus to Thibault, and the fourth amplified sense becomes taste. The monk prepares a simple mint infusion, filling the air with the fresh menthol scent, a cleansing contrast to the heavy odors of the infirmary. The slightly bitter, cooling taste is a gentle relief to Thibault's dry mouth, and Brother Aramis urges him to sip slowly, assuring him the drink will cool the blood without upsetting his stomach. He watches Thibault drink, slow and deliberate, and the small human story that emerges is the return of thirst, of taste, of life crawling back into a weakened body. The monk feels a quiet satisfaction, one moment of comfort, brief but real, in a world of violent cures. Brother Aramis changes perspective once more, thinking about the tempo of healing. Suddenly he believes that slowness is the key, that Isolde must be allowed to recover from the brutality of purgation. He writes in his parchment that she may receive only pomegranate wine and barley broth for the next few hours, a gesture of surrender to patience. He ends the sensory amplification with a gesture of inward stillness. Sitting on his wooden bench, he draws a long breath and fills his lungs with the scent of clay, mint and warm beeswax. A soft symphony he believes is the very essence of healing. The poetic image is the monk at rest, watching over his patients in a silence loaded with hope. The afternoon sun is setting, and the light slipping through the small window changes little by little, from a bright golden yellow to a soft orange glow that washes the room in a gentle, melancholy warmth. This slow shift in color becomes a quiet metaphor for hope rising again. The emotional climate of the infirmary shifts just as gradually. Brother Aramis, once restless and troubled by Isolde's lingering fever, now settles into a quieter acceptance. He reminds himself that healing is slow work and that nourishment must replace aggression. He sits more often, simply watching in silence, a subtle contrast to the agitation that filled his earlier movements. His attention rests on Isolde's cup of pomegranate wine. The liquid has lowered since morning, proof that she is no longer refusing nourishment. That small drop in the cup is a tiny human story of the body opening again to life. He writes in his parchment that the warm, moist nature of pomegranate is softening the dryness of black bile. He repeats a gentle ritual, rubbing fragrant, warm oil onto Isolde's wrists. The floral aroma drifts into the air, and his touch is slow and soothing on her skin. This rhythmic repetition becomes a new kind of mantra, the opposite of the relentless purges, a ritual of comfort. A historical curiosity returns to his mind. In the Middle Ages, people believed every temperament had a color. The melancholic, governed by black bile, should wear light colors, blue or white, to counter the darkness within. Brother Aramis, dressed in penitential brown, decides that Isolde should have a clean white linen sheet, a small symbol of purity and clarity. He shifts his focus to Thibault. The change has reached him too. The harsh smell of vermifuge is fading, replaced by the milder scents of mint and barley. The monk strengthens his belief that slow, steady nourishment is the true remedy for weakness. He orders lentil soup to be served to the peasant in small, warm portions every 2 hours. The slow, poetic gesture comes when Brother Aramis lifts a cup of wine and holds it toward the orange light of sunset, watching the reflection tremble inside the glass. In that tiny shimmer, he contemplates the dual nature of medicine, one hand that destroys, one that nourishes, both needed at different moments. He ends this gradual shift with a small human story he once read, of a healer who cured the sick with nothing more than touch and silence. Inspired, Brother Aramis chooses to sit quietly for a long time, offering no more violent cures, only the calm of his presence. Serenity settles over the room. The emotional climate in the infirmary grows steadier and more predictable, a gentle contrast to the turbulence of the purges. Brother Aramis focuses on reinforcing the idea that Isolde and Thibault need long rest and soft warmth to complete the healing begun by his harsher treatments. He orders the hearth to burn with a low, constant flame, making sure the air in the room stays warm and dry, a comfort that settles the mind as much as the body. He offers Isolde another cup of pomegranate wine, placing it in her hands with a slow, poetic motion. The small human story unfolding is the rediscovery of simple pleasure. The warm, sweet taste of the wine is the only strong sensation she receives, and she accepts it with quiet passiveness that Aramis takes as a sign of surrender to healing. The rhythmic repetition of feeding becomes a new ritual of hope. The monk shifts his attention to the use of words. He whispers to Isolde that the evil is sleeping, and that healing will come in silence. This soft repetition carries a gentle suggestion that soothes her spirit, turning the quiet of the abbey into something therapeutic. The small human story of language shows its contrast to chemical violence, calm speech as a medicine. He watches Brother Anselm enter with a thin white wheat bread for Thibaut, a light food easy to digest and ideal in Aramis's mind for the peasant's warm temperament. The soft, sweet aroma of the bread drifts through the air, its tender texture a subtle contrast to the coarse rye bread Thibaut is accustomed to. A historical curiosity surfaces, and Brother Aramis shares it with Sister Agnes. The medieval belief in medical astrology. He explains that the harvest of certain herbs and even bloodletting were scheduled according to constellations and planetary movements, since celestial influence was considered essential to healing. He consults his small leather almanac, a mystical object that guides his science. The monk strengthens his belief that the body, like the universe, obeys laws of order and repetition, and that slow cycles of nourishment and rest are the only true path back to harmony. He ends this slow variation with a quiet farewell, leaving the infirmary with silent certainty that healing is finally taking root. The chapter closes with a soft, poetic image, the infirmary bathed in orange twilight, shadows stretching gently across the sleeping patients. Isolde and Thibaut rest in peaceful stillness, warmed by the mild fire and fed by sweetness. A serene contrast to the violence of the treatments that brought them here. The rhythm is slow, and the monk's gentle voice dissolves into the abbey's quiet. Brother Aramis steps into the infirmary, and the air feels lighter and steadier, a striking contrast to the heavy scent of sickness and purgatives that once clung to the room. As he looks around, he silently recalls the past, noticing the small changes in his patients. He turns his attention to Isolde. The gentle touch of his hand on her forehead reveals a lower temperature. He remembers the human story of the black bile, the harsh purges with mercury, and the relief that followed the pomegranate wine. In his mind, the violence of the treatment had always been the violence of the illness being driven out. His focus shifts to Thibault's iron crucifix. The peasant no longer clutches it with desperate force. His hand lies more relaxed, a quiet sign that the pain and fear have begun to fade. Brother Aramis recalls Thibault's long struggle, his weakness, the repeated bleedings, and the comfort brought by the lentil soup. He listens to Thibault's breathing, now fuller and regular, and the soft sound of air filling his lungs becomes a rhythm of hope. The monk remembers the human story of the vermifuge and the warmth of the foot bath, remedies he believes restored the balance within the man's body. Brother Aramis changes perspective and prepares one final medicinal act before closing this chapter. A chamomile and honey infusion for Isolde. A soothing, nourishing tonic he considers the essence of final healing. The floral sweetness of chamomile offers a gentle contrast to the sharp smell of vinegar, a scent of peace and quiet. He recalls one last historical curiosity about the herb gardens of the abbeys. He explains to Sister Agnes that monks cultivated herbs not only for medicine, but also for distilling perfumes and incense used in rituals, substances meant to calm the spirit and purify the air. The scent of chamomile becomes a symbol of that dual purpose, useful and sacred. The monk turns back to Isolde. With a slow, poetic motion, he cleans the marks left by leeches and scarifiers with rose water, a soft, fragrant liquid meant to close the circle of pain. The tender touch of rose-scented water is his final act of charity toward her body. He creates a quiet atmosphere by extinguishing the brighter lamps and leaving only a small, flickering light in the corner. It casts a gentle golden glow over the patients. Then he withdraws, leaving them to the peaceful stillness of the abbey. The atmosphere deepens as night settles over the abbey of Saint-Félicien. Brother Aramis sits quietly beside Isolde and Thibault, and his own breathing becomes a slow, poetic gesture. He keeps it calm and deep, offering a silent rhythm of serenity for the sick to follow. His thoughts drift back to the foundations of medieval medicine and the strict rules that once guided every decision he made. He remembers the human story of the four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, and how health was believed to be the perfect balance among them. The monk recalls his initial aggressiveness, trying to purge Thibault's excess of blood and Isolde's excess of black bile. A gentle, quiet unease touches him as he realizes that true healing only began when he surrendered to nourishment and rest. Brother Aramis watches Thibault turn onto his side in his sleep and release a long, deep sigh. The soft sound fills the room like a sign of relief, and the monk interprets it as the end of the inner struggle against sickness. He remembers the human story of the peasant, his weakness, the loss of strength, and how the warm broths and wine slowly restored his vital heat. He shifts perspective and focuses on the voice, his final instrument of care. The monk recalls the importance of tone and storytelling in his healing practice, and he whispers a gentle blessing over Isolde and Thibault, speaking with a calm, unbroken cadence. His voice becomes a soft and reflective remedy of its own, meant to soothe their minds and lull them further into rest. The slow, poetic gesture continues as Brother Aramis extinguishes the last